This program might contain strong language. If you think you may be offended, switch off now.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Inside Mojo, where each week we bring you one of the most pivotal moments in WatchMojo's 20-year history on YouTube. I'm your host, Rob, and with me, as always, is WatchMojo's CEO and co-founder, Ashkan Karbasfrooshan. How's it going today, Ash?
Excellent. Honestly, no complaints. It's a bit of a snow day, so we had like 10 centimeters of snow, and they canceled everything. It's nice to see we are producing a generation of resilient future leaders. How are you?
Well, that's one way to look at it for sure. I'm doing great. Today is a little bit more of an uplifting episode. We've in past weeks we went through some of the early challenges for WatchMojo, including a lawsuit and some early financial struggles. But today we're looking at how WatchMojo kind of found its footing and turned a corner. So why don't we pick up where we left off last week, Ash, and talk to us about how WatchMojo started to find its groove?
Sure. I mean, when I've talked about entrepreneurship, I hit on like about originally 6, now about 8 or 9 things you need. So ambition, vision, persistence, execution, focus once you find out what to focus on, and then luck and timing and resilience. So it would be super disingenuous of me to sit here and kind of hold court and talk about things without just recognizing how lucky we were that we started at the same time as YouTube did. The reality is, I've always said the same way that ESPN and MTV were early on cable with like pretty crappy programming by their own admission, which then became really like the gold standard of premium content. We were very early to YouTube. And, we could see that there were all these different competitors that were trying to do what YouTube was doing. So I think it always starts with pretty, you got to blend the macro, the big world situation with your own strengths and your interests. So when we started, I think it was pretty clear that, the first wave of the web, you had like these portals, like Yahoo and AOL and MSN. And then, basically, so these were, all the different kinds of companies that kind of at one point or another tried to kind of become the dominant aggregator or player. So like if you're, I'm aging myself here, but it started off with like Real Player, which was just like a piece of software you download. And at the time it had like a huge market value. And then, you had like websites like eBaum's World, which wasn't like a UGC platform, but it was kind of like some guy, I think in like Rochester or, in New York State. But, and so, like he would just kind of like literally find videos and rip them off elsewhere and upload them. And then you had the portals, Yahoo, MSN, AOL, which is where I kind of like owned my craft. I used to write articles for AskMen, and these portals would take like half the article and then link back to us. And I was like kind of a well-read columnist, but I could see that like these guys are too into, they have like a plan A, they have their business model, and video was just a bit of a headache. So when we started in 2005, when we started to experiment, you had sites like Rever and Gooba, who were kind of like YouTube. You had Dailymotion in France, you had Metacafe out of Israel. And like I said, to me, YouTube was just a different kind of beast. And I think the reasons for that really had to do with just the way they were a lot more, loose and flexible with the DMCA and pirated content early on. But for us, it was kind of like, as we started, it was pretty clear to me that as much as content was important, you needed to find the right distribution platforms. And so we were lucky that we started when YouTube started.
Before we continue, I want to let the audience know that we have a poll going up on WatchMojo's YouTube page, and we would like to know, what type of videos do you watch the most on YouTube? So options are influencers, reviews, tutorials, or podcasts. And if there are any other categories of videos not listed, please let us know those in the comments, and we'll revisit that towards the end of the show. Ash, we often hear the term content is king thrown around a lot. How true is that, and how important was that for WatchMojo?
I think, look, content may be king, but distribution is queen. And we know who rules any household, whether it's a castle or normal household. And I go, but however, context is the prince, and I'll explain that. So when Sumner Redstone, who founded Viacom, when Sumner Redstone said content is king, I think people ran with it like it was some decree from God that like content has all the leverage. And he actually, I mean, he's an OG, like he's a legend of media. But I think he actually did a disservice to entire generations of entrepreneurs and media executives, and I'll expand. So all he meant was, as new distribution platforms arise, it creates new opportunities to distribute and therefore monetize content. That's what he meant, basically. And then later on, when Bill Gates, founder of Microsoft, acquired Corbis, which was like Getty, a stock image provider, he also wrote an article entitled "Content is King" to explain why a tech guy would go into content. And again, it kind of created this false sense of protection and security from media executives who felt just because we got great content, we'll hold out. And that's why I wanted to talk about it, because yeah, content, sure, it's king, but distribution ultimately in a tech era is not like a newsstand where it's just some beat up plywood on the corner of 42nd Street and Fifth Avenue that is interchangeable. In the tech era, I got news for y'all. Distribution has all the power. Not every second tier, third tier, poor man's version of the third tier distribution platform. But if you build global distribution platforms with scale, with first party data, I hate to break it to the monarchists who think content is king, but distribution is actually more powerful. Now, the only thing I'll add to that, and this is why I used context for our entrepreneurship brand, and Context TV, Context is King, the website, Context Matters, our suite of audio programming, including the show. I do think that two different types of videos on two different distribution platforms are entirely different. This is not saying anything like rocket science here. Take a kind of right-wing racist message. Totally bad. I'm not condoning it ever. But if you put that on a historical website, it has one very different context. It's educational. If anything, you're saying, hey, don't be stupid. Don't do what the Nazis did, and don't do what the fascists did or whatever. But that same website on whitepower.org, which I hope is not a real website, by the way, and don't find out what it is.
It probably is somewhere.
It probably is something, but that's a very different message, right? So context to me prevailed. Content, right environment. And one reason why YouTube was so successful, one of them was just embeddable video, that you could literally copy source code off the player and just paste it on any website. And that's actually ironically how YouTube blew up, because before Facebook, there was a little website called MySpace, and everybody would embed YouTube clips up on MySpace, which drove Rupert Murdoch crazy, because Rupert Murdoch, who owned Fox, was competing with Sumner Redstone, the other old white guy on the previous slide, for MySpace. And so News Corp was like, why the fuck did we buy MySpace if you guys are now building up YouTube? And he understood it, that they were basically creating the monster that became YouTube. And along with Facebook, both YouTube and Facebook are what killed MySpace.
Right. We saw a slide about the waves of tech video aggregators, but we also have one of web video content producers. So where does WatchMojo fall in to those categories?
So from 1994 to 99, there was I think Steven Spielberg was an investor in pop.com. They were really pop.com or pseudo.com. There was a number of really early players who had the vision and foresight, who wanted to kind of create programming for the web. But what was the drawback? There was no broadband usage. Consumers didn't even know you could watch video. You had the big fat dancing baby. You had things that would come and go. So those guys were kind of dead. They were dead on arrival. And then the dot-com bubble burst. So whatever venture capital might have been there, these guys all washed away. And it's hey, if you're really early to a market, you might as well just kill yourself. I mean, it's just chances are you're ahead. You're not going to build a business. Then the second wave is just noteworthy for me personally, because that's when I was at AskMan, and that's when I was like starting to see these companies like Mania TV, like Heavy, that were making a lot of noise, like PR wise, because they were like cutting edge, or some of them wouldn't really produce a lot of programming. They would just work with ads. So, Ad Age would write about them. I think that was more Heavy. Mania TV was trying to build like an MTV. And I would talk to them occasionally and be like, hey, do you want to promote your website? Do you want to, partner somehow? And really the key takeaways here, you can't, like, a lesson of, I'm a history guy, a lesson from World War II is Hitler could have ended up, going much further, but his downfall invariably would have been one thing or another. But his downfall was opening up the Eastern Front and expanding into the USSR, and then getting to Stalingrad and then being pushed back. You can't fight too many fronts. So these guys were basically trying to build the content. They were trying to build the distribution. They were trying to generate sales and make sure that the infrastructure, hosting, bandwidth, and all that was stable. You're effed. I mean, forget dead on arrival. You have no hope. Because even if you nail on one of them, it's impossible to nail all four, right? Mm-hmm. But so when I was watching these guys, I didn't even know I was going to become an entrepreneur. I was just like some young kid partying way too much and showing up to work somewhat hungover, and then just doing sales and partnerships and writing articles. But I was like, okay, like if I'm going to do something, it'll probably be in content, and I could see video as the future. And I was like, yeah, but this does not seem like a good strategy. I was so like, as I was becoming more of an intrapreneur and starting to have entrepreneurial kind of like impulses and desires and dreams, I was like, we're so late. The window is closing. So when I started, I tell people, look, it is what it is. I literally resigned, and I did a couple of interviews. I went to New York. I went to Miami. But I'd already built a team. I'd started to hire. We got an office. So I was already committed. And I just dove into it right away. And in hindsight, it would have been good to take a month or 3 months or 6 months. But again, I was just very impatient. So we tried, as part of the third wave, there was Revision 3, which produced Dig Nation. There was Next New Networks that was trying to build 30, maybe even more. I think it was like 64 networks, like a fashion, a travel. And I was like, okay, good luck. That seems like, I thought I was ambitious trying to build 12 verticals. But so we were all trying effectively to build content, put it on our website, as we also worried about the tech and all that. And it was impossible, because users who would stumble on a website with video were not in a state of mind to watch a video. Maybe they wanted an article. Maybe they wanted an image. I mean, heck, at that point, if you were watching online videos on the internet, you were probably looking for porn, to be honest with you, because porn is always ahead of mainstream marketing tactics. But so we had to make a choice. And my choice, because I didn't have a board that would have probably pushed back on this, I said, I may not like male pattern baldness, but it's a thing. I may not like gravity, but I can't fight it. The world spins this way. So I was like, the world is going to YouTube. Mm-hmm. Sure, maybe also Daily Motion and MetaCafe a bit. But then once you scratch the surface, you're like, YouTube is going to dominate. So we made the decision to really embrace YouTube. And then obviously we still had to figure out the programming, which was admittedly a bit all over the place.
And you guys had a lot of early competitors that had a lot of money and spent a lot of money, but many of them burnt out early. So what made WatchMojo different?
So, I mean, look, if setting false modesty aside, I think like when I mentioned Next New Networks and Revision 3, it's like Revision 3 was started off with like Dig Nation, a couple of, podcasters who launched dig.com. And so they were doing a show. They weren't like professional executives. So, the investors who invested, one of the few investors that was doing content invested in Revision 3. And so they bring their executives who are all traditional. Now, to be fair, Jim Louderback, who was the CEO at Revision, whom I like quite a bit, stayed in touch, great guy. Same thing with Next New Networks. They raised $27 million in funding, and they brought in, a bunch of Viacom execs. And I understood it, like I remember pitching to Ross Levinson and John Miller, who were like big executives initially at like Fox and, News Corp and many other places. And these guys, and AOL and many other places, and these guys like also launched a fund, and we would talk to them, and they were like, well, we like what you're doing, but I was kind of an unknown entity. And our approach was very different, right? We could talk about that a bit. But so all these companies ended up raising anywhere from like $1 million to 45. And since then, there's some that have invested raised even more. And even that million, this is like from a deck, a slide from an investor presentation. It wasn't even $1 million. I basically, as we've said this a few times, I invested $250,000. Then once I ran out of that, I got another 500. But we didn't build like a big C-suite of like a chief executive officer, a chief marketing officer, counsel, chief revenue officer, and all that. Like I was doing all those roles. I was also like the de facto editor in chief. So like I basically sucked up what would have been millions of dollars a year in salaries. And to be honest, that's like a boneheaded way of building any business, to have all these fancy schmancy C-level execs who've worked at huge companies who don't have any clue how to operate startups. But because you are an institutional investor and you have a fiduciary duty, you go hire these guys thinking, like they know what the hell they're doing, when they didn't. And also they didn't want to focus on YouTube. I can't stress that enough. Revision 3, I give Jim a lot of credit, but I have many memories of running into him at conferences, and he was like, nah, we don't like YouTube. It's like, why would we do this or that? And that was basically really it. Like we basically really, really looked at YouTube and said, we're going to program and come up with content for YouTube and the YouTube community, whereas everybody else was in la la land and denial.
Right. Let's talk about that approach to making content for YouTube. I want to show one of the early hits that you guys had, which was an interview with Canadian celebrity Justin Bieber back in his heyday, I guess, as a budding
Canadian
star.
celebrity is a global superstar now, but yeah, sure. Yeah.
So when did you start?
So this was big for you guys.
I was always singing around the house. It was a kind of thing that I just loved to do. I always played a lot of different instruments and stuff, so I grew up around music my whole life.
So the truth is, like, this is how far back we go, and we used to work. Like, we didn't kidnap the poor guy, like, off of this tour bus, and, Rebecca's like, sit here and let us ask you questions. This was Universal Music, who was promoting the then unknown Justin Bieber, same way that we interviewed, like, behind a bar, Lady Gaga when she was an unknown entity as well. I mean, that's how far back we go. So, yeah, I mean, I think when we did these interviews, these were more a testament to, like, Bieber blowing up. I do want to stress that. Like, it wasn't like, and I've interviewed 300 people, celebrities, newsmakers, and interviews are boring because you can't actually sit down with a celeb and be like, hey, you beat up your wife. Let's talk about that. Or like, hey, remember that time you drank 3 bottles of vodka and like hit a cop? Or like Mel Gibson, we're going to talk about that day when you said a bunch of crazy stuff. Like the publicist would jump in. So I always was like, look, this is not a replicable thing. This did millions because Justin Bieber was blowing up. But if you sit down with Cardi B even, or Gore, or Ja Rule, or Kendrick, it doesn't matter. You get kind of bullshit. And the world of the web was going less and less towards that packaged, kind of polished TV feel to more raw, kind of authentic programming. And I was like, yeah, I've done this. I've done the interviews. And I didn't want any of the limelight. I purposely wanted to build a media company, so I would send Rebecca and a few others to do the interviews. But it was just like, I was like, this isn't going to work. And this was like an early struggle when you manage a team. And my style, I was very open to hearing people. But I was like, we're all going to be living in a refrigerator box in a back alley if we think this hit is like a franchise. It's a one-off, But it was technically one of our first hits.
Yeah, it seems like the more type of thing that you would have seen on like Entertainment Tonight television, like more like television programming than YouTube programming as we know it now, because things have moved into more conversational, kind of like podcasts, where you can get into the weeds with people and have longer form conversations. That's not the only early hit that you guys had. You also had success with Origins of Superheroes, which is quite different.
As the next phase of human evolution, mutants within the Marvel comic book universe possess a gene that allows them to naturally develop superpowers. Hi, welcome to WatchMojo.com. I'm your host, Derek Allen. Today we'll be exploring the history of one such mutant, Wolverine. To avoid confusion, it should be noted that we are following the...
We take this seriously. I mean, so it's funny. This store was a store underneath my condo at the time, which I ended up mortgaging. And it's funny. They went there. We would always look for random backdrops. So yeah, this was something that, like, I remember we used to plan 6 months out, and we were like, oh, September 15th is the 50-year anniversary of Batman. And I was like, let's just do like biographies. Like, these are real people. And my concern was that DC or Marvel would send us like a cease and desist, but they never did. Again, this show is, I mean, I like to be modest and humble, but the point isn't to bullshit people into saccharine nonsense. That is what it takes. Like I've alluded to it. Behind every fortune is a great crime. There's no crime here. It's fair use. And these are our clients and partners now. But it takes that kind of risk-taking, confidence, pushing the envelope. If I would have asked them for permission, even if it was within our law to comment, criticize, mash up, yada, yada, they obviously would have said, yeah, go fuck off. We don't do this. Even if we don't disagree that you have a right, we're not going to license you. It's not our business. Like, we want to put butts in the seats. So we pushed the envelope, but we were careful if somebody really was like, had a thoughtful, reasonable position. But my concern was, yeah, some junior person that doesn't know the law could just be like, you're not allowed to do this, And what I just think is interesting about our little side note is today the web would be very different if it wasn't for our struggles, because if rights holders had their way, they would control all media, who gets to post what when. And think of like YouTube. You're watching the hockey game. You could go and see clips pretty much right away. Mm-hmm. And that's some of the work that we did. But yeah, so this was actually a franchise. This was something that Origins of Superheroes, we did 50. I didn't even know we had fucking Ant-Man. I was like, oh my God. But this was when I could see the whole geek culture. Marvel had been acquired by Disney. It was clear, like, they probably sat there. And by the way, not to have a big head, I am pretty sure that when we started doing this, and these were seen millions and millions of times, it did kind of probably give more confidence to development executives. No joke. I mean, I know, but this has been confirmed in talks. Like, record labels have told us, like, you guys promoted Queen so much that we were like, wow, and Queen, not because of us, because it's freaking Queen and Mercury and May. It's like the gods of music. Mm-hmm. But Queen is super popular because us and millions of others were talking about them and doing stories. So I think when we started to do this, I am sure that there were some development execs that were like, okay, we could do a movie on Superman, but there's no demand for Ant-Man, is there? And then when we start doing these and they read the comments, there are some voices that are like, should we issue a cease and desist? But some wiser person is like, shut up. We're not going to send a cease and desist.
You're almost like conducting a survey from like the land of the internet. Like, are you interested in this or not? And then the big companies can use that information to make their decisions.
And the proof is today, these companies are our clients. They advertise with us when they have new shows. So
you've often spoken about fishing where the fish are. Tell me about that and the approach to content with that view.
Well, yeah, I mean, so the fishing where the fish are, when I speak to that, it's about the YouTube at the time opportunity. And what I'm getting at is, again, it would be weird if I were to tell like an aspiring storyteller entrepreneur, yeah, go do something on YouTube. You should be aware of YouTube. YouTube's a great platform. But I'm like, whether it's Snap, whether it's TikTok, whether it's Crapster, whether it's X, whatever, you do need to go where there are people who are engaged and care about your ultimate product. And this is a flagrant mistake all of our competitors and the incumbents did. They had this very misguided sense that like their content was so special that like they could hold on to it and people would go to their sites. I was having a discussion with, I've alluded to this already, with Bell Media in Canada, like 10 years ago. And they were like, well, our team at TSN, which is like Canada's version of ESPN, or if Trump had his way, ESPN's division, I guess. They had this thinking that if we put our content from TSN on Facebook, we will validate Facebook. And I was like, do you really think Facebook cares about you? You know what I mean? Like it's Facebook. And I'm like, and that's ultimately, I think, the fundamental mistake others did, whereas we took the right approach, which was the world is on YouTube now, right? So understanding how Google won, it wasn't one thing. They had a good product. They had the right backers. All the initial search like Alta Vista, Excite, Lycos had moved to becoming portals. They stayed independent versus selling too much, and they inspired themselves from GoTo's model. When the dot-com bubble burst, nobody else was interested in the web. They signed a really smart deal with Yahoo, which kind of fucked Yahoo in the end, or Yahoo fucked themselves. That era, that management, totally different management now. And then, they made a couple of really, really smart acquisitions, and then that's it. They were like the dominant player, and it was kind of like obvious, but also, discreet. And so YouTube won. Frankly, it started off with like the PayPal mafia. It was a couple of guys who had left PayPal, and they were smart. But I think Sequoia's brass balls was the key. Sequoia was like, we don't care. Like, we'll defend you. We'll rely on the DMCA. There's enough safeguards that we're a platform. We're not responsible for pirated content. But then things like Flash Video, mastering, the DMCA, and then selling to Google. We would not be here. Like, I think YouTube would have had an interesting trajectory, but I don't think any company would have done with YouTube what Google did. And Google deserves a lot of credit for that. And because Google Video was so not successful, that the Google execs who all think they're super smart, and they come from good education backgrounds. They thought like, usually they're like, we know what to do, but I think with YouTube, they just left it alone. The technology, the integration with AdWords, and like the FTC and all the, government people were too inexperienced or dumb to really understand how dominant YouTube and Google were getting. They got sued by Viacom, seeking $1 billion in damages. The trial went nowhere. Like, it was a stalemate. So technically Viacom, by not winning, Google won. And then they really, really, to their credit, didn't care about monetization. They even had TrueView, which was like skip ad, which is like so disruptive. You're a viewer, you now think you can not only control what to watch, but also which ads to sit through. And they just outsmarted their frenemies like Vivo, who could have had a future, but I don't know what they were thinking. And then, when it was convenient for them, then they leveraged the creator community, which I know YouTube is not going to like this, but YouTube has never really cared about, like, really. It's just like they can't put a spotlight on Paramount that was suing them. They can't really put a spotlight on Eminem, which is record label's IP at the end. Mm-hmm. So they kind of like midway in their 20-year history, when they started Brandcast, they kind of made it seem like we really care about creators, but the creators are a cog to them. They're not, they're going to hate that I say this, but it's just, they're a platform. They don't care, So the creators are a bunch of hookers. You know what? They're a bunch of Kleenexes to them.
Fair enough. You mentioned that it's actually a good
thing.
I love
them, and they've been great. But I'm just saying realistically.
It's a symbiotic relationship. Well, one cannot exist without the other.
Well, I don't think so, because YouTube can exist without. Even if Mr. Beast wasn't on the platform today, and Mr. Beast is the king now. He's the king of YouTube. Nobody would care.
Yeah, that's true. And I'm curious, this is off topic, but what do you think about Mr. Beast branching out now into Amazon Prime programming, and how does that translate? Trying to replicate the YouTube content, but on a different, totally different platform.
Yeah, so I think Mr. Beast is a really smart fellow, because he realized like what mistakes, say, PewDiePie and others did before him. So even though it's Mr. Beast and it's like personality, I think to his credit, he built operations, he built a team. He built systems and processes like we did. And I think he has no choice, because he's too big. Like, he can't get that much bigger on YouTube alone. So if you don't branch out to other platforms or other verticals or other formats or other something, what do? You if you don't innovate and adapt, you die. So I give him credit for that. And he's going to make mistakes and missteps. And because he's the biggest one, he has a target on his back. But I do think 99% of I do think 99% of the criticism, I'm not defending like the bad behavior, if there was any Me Too stuff, I'm not defending that stuff, but a lot of his criticism is just envy and jealousy.
A lot of big creators on YouTube have specific formats that they specialize in. How important do you think that is, and do you think that really defines the success of a platform or a channel on YouTube?
Yeah, so one of the feedback I got around 2010-11 was for Shane Smith, Vice, and Troy Young, who was a bit everywhere, eventually Hearst. But at the time, he was, I think, at Say Media, both Canadian, but running American businesses. They were both like, your content's all over the place. They're like, it's really impressive what you've built. But they weren't even talking about formats. They were talking about categories.
Okay.
They're like, one day you got car tip. Yeah, so this is something I created when I gave the VidCon keynote. this is missing pranks, by the way, sometime in, let's say, 2008. And I want to update it to bring it up in time for our documentary, which should be out in a couple of months, called Just Watch, kind of a story of YouTube. But yeah, no, I think format, which is like an axis along with categories, is really key. So these are more genres, right? So I kind of go, there's formats, there's like all the lingo, but so you've gone through it first. It was just pirated content, what really drove the popularity. Then it was a lot of user-generated content, like random one-offs. So there was no like replicableness to it. It was just one-offs. And people were always, you'd meet, you're like, how could we go viral? I was like, this meeting is over. If you want to plan how to go viral. If you can actually go back, I was like, if you want to plan to go viral, just go get an STD. That's your safest bet right now. And then you had vloggers, some who were fake, like Lonely Girls, some like Ray William Johnson, Phil DeFranco, who are all at one point or another the kings of YouTube. But you burn out, you know, if you don't actually execute and diversify or build a team, you know, content, there is a shelf life. Then you had do-it-yourself how-tos. Then you had music. We talked about Justin Bieber. I think around 2012, 2013, in 2014, we were the 7th largest channel in the world, which is amazing, you know. And people go like, do you miss? I mean, yeah, you want to be 7th. You want to be the 1st largest. But the reality is I knew that would only be possible that if YouTube would not grow. But obviously, if you then see others like PewDiePie, and then you see like others like unboxing and kids, and this doesn't even show it, but like you actually now have mainstreamification. You have news content. You have a lot of shows, you know, like I remember, it's not here. I have the 1 million plaque. I have the 10 million somewhere else. I remember Marvel didn't have a channel. That's why we could produce content and it was like entertaining. Marvel reached 20 million subscribers within a couple of years after launching their show. And a lot of, you know, I think more self-centered, nearsighted entrepreneurs would be like, that sucks. I was like, this is amazing. It's validation, and you know, it's Disney, it's their IP. Like I was genuinely happy for them, but it was like a rising tide lifts all boats. It, you know, to me, it made a ton of sense. But yeah, so I do think that YouTube was really about niche if you're Canadian, or niche if you're American. Susan Wojcicki, the great late CEO of YouTube, she kind of coined or popularized that whole super serve your audience. And I do think that YouTube was all about that. And this is something we got wrong, or we didn't optimize early on. Our content was actually quite heterogeneous. And even when we narrowed it to the format of top 10s, Hat Tip Moses and the 10 Commandments, it was like still a bit all over the place. You know, you had like a gaming, a top 10 travel, all of a sudden top 10 sandwiches, top 10 dictators. You're like, I saw like a grilled cheese in the previous video. Now I'm seeing Hitler and the Holocaust. Like, what is the connection here, right? To me, it made sense and it worked, but that's not the playbook. The playbook is like, I run a channel doing recipes that are vegan for breakfast. And even if you do a breakfast that's not vegan, or you do a vegan dinner, people on YouTube are like, dislike, unsub, die. It's a very weird, you know, it's a very weird platform like that, but it's a great platform, but it's just very fickle. It's not like NBC where you're like, I'll get SNL, I'll get news, I'll get Dateline. YouTube is extremely niche. It's just, that's the nature of the platform.
Does the nature of the content kind of speak to that field of dreams approach where, you know, whatever you put out there, there's an audience for it and it will find its way to that content?
Well, no, I don't think you could totally just produce content and be like the stars will align. I mean, no, it's like you want the girl, you have to go talk to her. You have to ask her out. You know, it's just, she may come to you, but it doesn't usually work that way. Like you have to get off the off ramp. So no, I definitely don't think produce the content. What I've always meant by field of dreams is if you build it, like first build it and then worry about everything else. So one of our early competitors, Next New, you know, they're in New York, close to Madison Avenue, where marketers are, more overhead. So they weren't really producing content in year 3 or 4. It was all branded content, right? It was all like, okay, we're going to go and, you know, pitch this series to American Express about how much small business owners love their point of sale terminal. I was like, get the fuck out. Nobody cares about this. Nobody cares about this. So they would show much bigger like revenue early on, but it was like a box of, it was like a house of cards. You know, I was like, nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I want to talk to small business owners about why they love their point of sale terminal. But that was like the kind of content that some people were producing, and it made no sense. Meanwhile, we're like top 10, whatever, lesbian makeout scenes in movies, which was probably going to do a bit better.
So YouTube,
some of our videos.
I wonder why that would do better. It's a mystery.
I don't know. I'd like to commission a report, a study, and no, I'm kidding.
YouTube's evolved a lot over the years, and the content on the platform has also had to. So how does a company like WatchMojo evolve with the times while also kind of staying true to the formats that it's become known for?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's like a PR bullshitty lie and then like the real truth. So as I said earlier, like I didn't want to be the top 10 guy, even though I love top 10s. I obviously like essays, Q&As, biographies, but like you kind of look at what your clients want, your users want. You see what your team is more passionate and good at. So again, you've got to match internal with external. We've tried to diversify. So this actually, just to explain, is if you think about it, all the successful things that happened on YouTube, there was actually a previous version of it to some extent. It's just the previous guys, the incumbents, were too lazy, too slow, too rich, too fat, too stupid, too whatever to just innovate or die. Jukin Media with their fail army and all that is basically America's Funniest Home Videos. WatchMojo obviously was not just Letterman, which was funny, just sound bites, or Wayne's World or Moses, but it was top 10 lists. We didn't end that. Pranks, Vitaly pranks, whatever, all this crazy stuff that was like hardcore pranks that I was like, Jesus Christ, how are these guys not getting arrested? Was so intense compared to like Candid Camera and JFL's gags. JFL's gags are like they're also from Montreal, and I give them credit. Vice, JFL, Cirque du Soleil, all great media brands out of Montreal. I just give them props. But in this context, fair is fair to say, JFL's obsessed. Well, they sold it now, but they were obsessed with their gags. And I was trying to tell them for years, I'm like, if you compare that to the fare on WatchMojo, where there's like a bloody half corpse coming out of a trunk of a car scaring some poor gal, do you think anybody gives a fuck about your stupid gags, which are cute? Like, how does that stand out? It's like a guy on a bike where there's like a fake police taking a picture. Okay, great. That's good when I'm like on an 8-hour flight on my third, Johnny Walker Black Label. Like, but online, how does that even? And people don't get this because they're so like, so I'm getting to a point. I like to take So we could have always been like, we're the top 10 guys. Fuck that. You can't be that stupid in life. Like there's always, there's so much competition for attention. There's so many people. You and I, we don't have a God-given right to anything. We have a God-given right to 2/3 of fuck all, So you have to adapt. You have to innovate. My biggest challenge is the team. And I don't mind saying it like this. It's a great team. I built the most kick-ass team, but they are specialists at things. And when I come, I'm like the crazy content story guy, media guy that wants to experiment and iterate. And that means change. That means disruption. So it's really more the struggle has always been, do you want to break what works to get the company to somewhere new, which could fail? And when people fuck up, I don't blame them. But if it seems like when I want to go in a direction, it becomes a bit more like, why did we do this? Why? I'm like, you only have a job because we took a risk on this department that hired you.
That's right.
But they don't get that. And it's fine. I love them. But so as I get older, I'm also like, okay, to have that conversation with them. So the biggest challenge, we got cash in the bank. We're profitable. We a few years ago, we took so many risks. But I feel now it's more like you just as an entrepreneur, it's like Donald Rumsfeld says that line. Oh, yeah. You go to the army with the team you have, and I more and more I see what their strengths are. I don't focus on not so much weaknesses, but things that they may not be necessarily the best at. But otherwise, we could experiment all we want, but it takes so much patience and commitment for things to become hits now. Think of Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan started 10 years ago doing this podcast. People are like, oh, podcasting, we should do this. No, you moron. Unless you're willing to do it for 5 years, you can't. So company eras. This might have been, I took it out of my third book, The 10-Year Overnight Success. So 2006 to 9, we're just experimenting. 9 to 11, we start to tinker a bit more on factual. we were like, okay, factual, it's evergreen. We have a competitive advantage. The team, I was hiring English, journalism, communication. So I was like, these people know this racket. And then we kind of found our platform format fit, which was, the 4 pillars: fair use, using clips, top 10 format, geek culture as a category, and entertainment, and then obviously YouTube. And then 2017, 18, we hit a wall where we had grown a lot. We got hacked. It was just like and this is normal in business, where sometimes all of the tailwinds can eventually catch up and become headwinds. So we kind of then had to go and reinvent ourselves. And we did. We launched Miss Mojo. We expanded to Snap. It was always funny when we get the odd email, somebody who would discover us on Snap or TikTok or Insta be like, hey, you guys have a YouTube channel? And I loved it. I was like, yeah, no. So we experimented a lot. And then once we found it, we could have just done that, but we definitely have done a lot of other things. But in media, it's like that. Wall Street Journal is, at the end of the day, a print, website, but it's an article-based news source.
Yeah.
PewDiePie was ultimately just about Let's Play gaming. Mr. Beast, it's ultimately challenges. If he goes, I'm going to do documentaries about the blind, if there's no challenge component, nobody cares. And I love the guy, but it's just, you have to be honest. Everything, ESPN, cable, sports, that's it. Nobody cares. And when they got all woke, and by the way, I don't mind the principles of the DEI woke movement, but it became a caricature. I'm watching sports. Why is this dumbass telling me some nonsense that I didn't tune in to hear on a sports channel? And then I found out this person was having sex with like his or her like direct report. Like, it's all hypocrisy, right? So what I'm getting at is, like, ultimately you do have to stay true to who you are. And we are ultimately known for top 10 pop culture. It is what it is. You embrace it.
Yep. And one of the advantages of that is that you can then streamline your content. And you mentioned that simplicity being one of the keys to producing content at the scale that we have. So how important was finding that format and identifying that for the health of the company?
Well, look, the reality was the company was an expensive hobby for the first 6 years. It was a great way for people to remind me that I wasn't that smart and I didn't know what I was doing, right? So obviously it's once the business became successful that then, even if you say you don't care what people say, that's not really true, because even as an athlete, you need to get drafted by a team. You need to be coached. You do need certain validations. So I had no choice. We were in it for 6-7 years, but it's once we found that, and then we became profitable after breaking even, and then you could really reinvest and hire more people and pay people more and just expand. That's really when it became a business. But a couple of weeks ago or last week, you said, were the VCs wrong who didn't invest in you?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I like to be consistent. And I don't think they were wrong, because it took us 6-7 years to break even. And even though we're like a well-run company, we don't generate $800 million of revenue. We don't. So it's not like WatchMojo had that profile. But here's the real reality: I never really cared to build a VC business. I cared to build a business that was built to last. A business that real fans, real viewers cared about, and we didn't have to play a bunch of smoke and mirror bullshit marketing tactics to be like, oh, we got all these people visiting us, when in fact they were just like passersby.
Right.
So in the end, it's kind of like, to be fair, I was right, they were right, because it was just not really a fit. We were kind of trying to build two very different things.
Fair enough. But we're here 20 years later. So it all happened for the best, I suppose.
Yeah.
We've got our poll results in. So we asked, what type of videos do you watch the most on YouTube? And our audience said 47% say they watch influencers and creators, 19% tutorials, 16% reviews, 16% podcasts. So a pretty even split, but the highest percentage, almost half of our results came from influencers and creators. Yeah, that's super popular. I think that's what do I watch most? Probably podcasts at this point. That's probably my bread and butter right now. I was never big on influencers and creators, but podcast hosts, they kind of bridge the gap a little bit too.
I've never been into the influencer creators, although I champion them and I love them and I think good for them. I think good, stick it to Hollywood. It was always in your head. You were trying to convince some I'm adding a bit of mustard to defend the creators. Like some failed actress became a casting director at some failed company, but he or she would decide like who would be a star on Hollywood. Whereas like the web and YouTube gave that opportunity to somebody, and these are not saying in a bad way, somebody who was maybe overweight, somebody who had a lisp, somebody who had a speech impediment, somebody who was bald, somebody who was fat, somebody who was ugly, whatever. That's the beauty of the web, right? So YouTube really, as a microcosm, was this emancipator, and it kind of like broke away brick by brick the gatekeeper model. And I love it, but it was never my thing. I didn't need to sit and hear some girl talk about Chicago or why she loved Beyonce. I was like, what we created was like what I wanted and what was missing, which actually goes back to one of the most important lessons of entrepreneurship. Solve a problem, solve a need that you are facing sometimes, because there are probably other people who are just not entrepreneurial who also feel that way as well. And if you kind of care about solving that problem, you're going to build a business. But if you start off with, we want to build content to make money from advertising, what is the content? That'll never work.
You've mentioned that most media companies or successful media companies are kind of one-trick ponies. So what does that mean for WatchMojo moving forward? How do we look ahead to the evolution of YouTube over the next few years and project to like where we will be?
So, I mean, just anecdotally, we didn't plan this big podcast. Literally, like we said it on the first episode, you sent an email, just a general thing that, hey, I do podcasts. I'm interested in podcasts. If that's something we want to do. I was like, some other guy, Young Deuces, was like, have you thought of a documentary on WatchMojo? And that's what I do. I connect dots. I'm like, nobody gives a fuck about a documentary on WatchMojo except maybe my mother and maybe your mother, but I was like, it's not like, I don't think most people care.
I care.
But I care. No, I mean, I care. I'm exaggerating. A lot of people care. But, but I was like, a more interesting idea to me would be a story of YouTube through our experience. And then I was like, I got my third book, but then I was like, let's do a podcast, right? But this is a good example. Yes, this will air on WatchMojo, but it's not like we're really force feeding it. We are trying to, like, whether it's the Context brand or whether it's Mojo Plays, or this will also live on Spotify and X, So I think it's about getting outside of your comfort zone and not being like, honest to God, I've said this before, I could have died in Iran in 1984 or something during the war as a 6-year-old, like as crazy as it is. So I kind of like, and I sometimes forget it, but like every day is gravy. Every day is a bonus, right? That's why I always seem like I'm so excited and want to accomplish so much, because at the core, that's my nature. That's what's my reality when whomever decided to drop me onto this planet. So I'm like never going to be laying back complacent. If I don't push more, it's because the people, when you push, you hurt people. You put them in uncomfortable positions. And as an empathetic person, I don't like to do that. At 20 years, I don't care as much about that, I admit. Like, it goes up and down, different things. So now it's like, we're going to do some stuff. We're going to experiment. You're welcome to help me, or just get the fuck out of my way and do your job. You know what I mean? Like, it's very simple. I'm not going to come over your shoulder. I don't micromanage. But if you are not an entrepreneurial person, there's some people at this company, I'm like, hey, what do you think about this or that? And I get like this. This is what I get, a blank. Like, they're not even... But I love them because I didn't hire them to come and do like new product development. They came to like edit or fix some goddamn color correction. So I've become like Buddha. Buddha wasn't born Zen, by the way. I'm like, do your thing. But now I realize, like you can't have art by committee. So we're going to try things. It's fun. Somebody doesn't like it. Good for you. Go yell at a wall. And also viewers, like back in the day, viewers were like, I did not sign. Look, I love you. Thank you for your patronage. You don't have to click. Like, this is not North Korea. Saddam Hussein is not taking your finger and clicking on the mouse to watch. Just go watch something else. Like, we have 20 videos a day, like what more? It's just more free content. So, and also not taking yourself seriously. Like, that's just, you have to experiment, but you have to put yourself out there and know that some things will not work. We did the lineup, which was like a pretty clever game show. Okay, it could have been better in hindsight, but I'm happy we did it. We did the worst travel show. It wasn't really something I was like pushing to do, but I was like, okay, people have ideas. And in the end, like, our lives didn't change, but I'm glad we did them,
Right. Well, you gotta experiment, otherwise you stagnate, I guess. That's
innovate or die, motherfuckers. That's in business, it's that simple.
Let's do a little preview for next week's episode. We will be talking about WatchMojo's 4 pillars.
Yeah, I mean, we've alluded to this, so we could kind of expand and make it like informative. But it's basically, yeah, I mean, at a high level, it's, the geek culture. And I want to maybe put it like today, what are some things that in the next decade, like entrepreneurs and storytellers should look for, instead of just repeating, yeah, like Disney bought Marvel. And I'm like, oh, this is going to get big. But like, what's the pattern? And if you're in 2025 looking forward, what is that next inflection point? Format and top 10 list. I mean, we don't need to dwell on that. Fair use, we could obviously talk about that, and we should. But I think also right now with AI, there's some interesting parallels that I could say, hey, fair use allowed us to push the envelope. AI, similar parallel, if anybody's interested. And I've done a video on the Context TV channel on AI and storytelling, which people seem to like. It just breaks down the opportunities. And then, yeah, talking about YouTube. And then we could similarly just kind of look at like quick tail of the tape. Hey, it's 2025. Is YouTube still the best, game in town, or is it all about Snap or TikTok or X or whatever?
Awesome. Should be an interesting episode. Tune in for that next Thursday on YouTube, LinkedIn, X, and Spotify, I believe. We're everywhere. Well, thank you for your time as always, Ash.
And don't forget, tomorrow's Valentine's Day. So
that's right. Do something special for the person you love, or people.
Excellent. Sure, yeah. Your life might be more interesting than mine.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Until next time.
Cheers.
Take it easy.